Section 11 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 4, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Anne Boulay. Anne Boleyn, Chapter 1, Part 3. Anne took possession of the stately mansion which her enamored sovereign had provided for her early in December, for on the 9th of that month the French ambassador writes, Mademoiselle de Boulogne has arrived, and the king has placed her in very fine lodgings, immediately adjoining to his own, and there, every day, more court is paid to her than she ever paid to the queen. Henry, indeed, induced his courtiers to attend the daily levees, which she, like a rival queen, held with all the pomp of royalty. She had her ladies in waiting, her train-bearer, and her chaplains, and dispensed patronage both in church and state. At Christmas the king joined his family at Greenwich, and Anne Boleyn outraged all propriety by accompanying him. She and the queen, however, were not supposed to associate. The queen kept open house as usual, and Mistress Boleyn held her revels apart. Scandal, of course, was busy with her name. What lady who submitted to occupy a position so suspicious could escape with a reputation unblemished? The reports of the foreign ambassadors, especially those of France and Venice, are full of those rumours which might have been foreseen by any female who had the slightest delicacy of mind. The apathy of Anne Boleyn to such imputations can only be accounted for by her residence in the licentious court of Francis I, where she had seen the Countess Chateaubriand and the Duchess d'Estampes treated with the distinction of princesses and tolerated by the ladies of the royal family. Even her own illustrious and high-minded patroness, Margaret, Duchess of Alençon, had condescended to avail herself of the influence of d'Estampes over the mind of Francis, in more instances than one, a melancholy proof of the deterioration of the moral standard of diplomatists. In the commencement of the year 1529, Gardiner was again dispatched to Rome to plead for the divorce. It is a curious fact that on the 4th of April, Anne Boleyn sent him a present of cramp rings, accompanied with the following letter. It is expressed in a style which shows she either considered him as her friend, or was desirous of persuading him that she thought him such. Mr. Stephen, I thank you for my letter, wherein I perceive the willing and faithful mind you have to do me pleasure, not doubting but as much as it is possible for man's wit to imagine you will do. I pray God to send you well to speed in all your matters, so that you will put me in a study how to reward your high service. I do trust in God you shall not repent it, and that the end of this journey shall be more pleasant to me than your first, for that was but a rejoicing hope, which ceasing, the lack of it does put to the more pain, and they that are partakers with me, as you do know. Therefore do I trust that this hard beginning shall make the better ending. Mr. Stephen, I send you here the cramp rings for you, and Mr. Gregory Casale and Mr. Peter. Pray you to distribute them both, as she, that you may assure them, will be glad to do them any pleasure which shall be in my power. And thus I make an end, praying God send you good health. Written at Greenwich, the 4th day of April, by your assured friend, Anne Boleyn. There is something remarkable connected with this presence of cramp rings, seeing that by a superstition, parallel to the kings of England curing the evil by their touch, the queens of England were supposed to possess the power alone of consecrating cramp rings. The question naturally arises, how came Anne Boleyn, in the year 1529, by a sufficient number of cramp rings for Gardiner to distribute among the English embassage to the Pope, if she had not taken upon herself the queenly office of consecrating them? It is remarkable that those cruel persecutors of our early reformers, Gardiner and Bonner, were the most active of all the ecclesiastics for the divorce, and that Cranmer was brought forward as an allié of Gardiner for the same purpose. All three were under a special patronage of Anne Boleyn, and rose to greatness chiefly through her influence. Cranmer, when he was first encountered by Gardiner at the house of Mr. Cressy, at Waltham, was occupied in the tuition of Mr. Cressy's sons. His eloquence and learning attracted the attention of Gardiner, who, to prove him, introduced the topic of the divorce, and asked in what manner he would proceed if the conduct of that affair were entrusted to him. I would obtain the opinion of the most learned universities in Europe on the validity of a marriage contracted under such circumstances," was the reply. Gardiner communicated this rejoinder to the king, on which Henry made this characteristic exclamation, "He has gotten the sow by the right ear!" The plan was adopted, and Cranmer was immediately received into the family of Anne Boleyn's father, where he was treated with much regard. Soon after he was preferred to the office of chaplain to the king, and ever enjoyed the confidence and favour of the fair Anne Boleyn, whose theological opinions he is supposed to have greatly influenced. The first introduction of Tyndall's translations of the Holy Scriptures was, according to Strype, effected while Anne Boleyn was the all-powerful favourite of Henry, served with royal pomp and attended by a suite of maids of honour, like a queen. Among the ladies of her retinue there was a fair young gentlewoman called Mistress Gainsford, who was beloved by Anne's equerry, a youth of noble lineage, named George Zouch. In the course of their love tricks, George one day snatched a book out of young Mistress Gainsford's hands, to which she was attending more than he approved when in his company. It was no other than Tyndall's translation of the Gospels, which had been lent to her by her mistress Anne Boleyn, to whom it had been privately presented by one of the reformers. It was proscribed by Cardinal Wolsey, and kept secretly from the king. Mistress Gainsford, knowing its importance, tried to get it back from her lover, but George Zouch remained perversely obstinate, and kept it to tease her. One day he went with other courtiers to the king's chapel, when he took it into his head to read the book he had snatched from his beloved, and was soon so utterly absorbed in its contents, that the service was over before he was conscious of the lapse of time. The dean of the chapel, wishing to see what book the young gentleman was perusing with such attention, took it from his hand, when, finding it was the prohibited version of the Scriptures, he carried it to Cardinal Wolsey. Meantime, Anne Boleyn asked Mistress Gainsford for the book she had lent her, who, greatly terrified at its loss, confessed that George Zouch had stolen it, and detained it to torment her. Anne Boleyn sent for George and inquired into the matter. When she heard the fate of the book, she was not angry with the lovers. "But," she said, "it shall be the dearest book that ever dean or cardinal detained." She then hastened to the king, and entreated that he would interpose to recover her stolen volume, a request with which he instantly complied. The first use she made of her recovered treasure was to entreat the king to examine it, and this incident had a great effect in producing the change that followed. This circumstance is supposed to have precipitated the fall of Wolsey. Anne Boleyn had not forgiven, she never did forgive, the interference which had deprived her of her first love, Percy. The anger she had conceived against the cardinal on this occasion remained, after a lapse of 6 years, an unquenchable fire. In the hope of making him an instrument in her aggrandizement, she had, as we have seen, condescended to employ the arts of flattery, till she perceived that he was playing a game as fine and as false with her as she with him, and that it was no part of his intention to make her an amend for the loss of a countess's coronet, by assisting her to encircle her brow with a queenly diadem. She had, moreover, shrewd reason to suspect, however fairly he might carry it with her, that he was the man who secretly incited the popular cry, "We'll have no Anne Boleyn. Nan Boleyn shall not be our queen." Anne dissembled no longer than till Wolsey, entangled in the perplexities of the net he had woven for his own destruction, had committed himself irrevocably with the queen, and at the same time incurred the suspicions of the king by his sinuous conduct. She then placed in Henry's hands letters written by the cardinal to Rome, which afforded proofs of his duplicity. These she had obtained from her kinsman, Sir Francis Bryan, and they weighed heavily against the minister. She had already obtained more than one signal triumph over him, especially in the case of Sir Thomas Cheney, whom Wolsey had injuriously driven from the court. Cheney entreated the intercession of Anne Boleyn with the sovereign, and she pleaded his cause so successfully, that he was recalled, and Wolsey received a reprimand. Having once declared her hostility, Anne was not of a temper to recede. She pursued her advantage with steady implacability, and in this she was fiercely seconded by her uncle Norfolk, the Duke of Suffolk, Henry's brother-in-law, and, but at this no one can wonder, her defrauded lover Percy, whose compulsory marriage with Lady Mary Talbot had rendered him the most wretched of men. An opportunity of inflicting an overwhelming blow on the cardinal soon offered. Wolsey, who was determined not to lose his credit with the sovereign without a struggle, after many repulses, obtained permission to accompany Campeggio when that legate went to take leave of the king at Grafton. Campeggio received the most scrupulous attention, and stately apartments were provided for his use. But Wolsey was forced to be indebted to the civility of Henry Norris for the temporary accommodation of a chamber. This was an ominous beginning, and when Wolsey entered the presence chamber, the courtiers awaited with intense curiosity the result of his reception. But when the monarch entered, and Wolsey tendered the homage of his knee, a sudden revulsion in his favour immediately took place in the royal mind. Henry raised him up with both hands, and led him to the window, where he held a long private conference with him, to the dismay of the adverse party. And so, continues Cavendish, departed the king, and dined the same day with Mrs. Anne Boleyn in her chamber, who kept state there, more like a queen than a simple maid. I heard it reported, pursues our author, by those who waited on the king at dinner, that Mistress Anne Boleyn was offended as much as she durst, that the king did so graciously entertain my lord cardinal, saying, Sir, it is not a marvellous thing to see into what great debt and danger he hath brought you with all your subjects. How so? Said the king. Forsooth, she replied, there is not a man in your whole nation of England worth £100, but he hath indebted you to him, alluding to the late loan, an expedient in the ways and means of government, which originated with that bold statesman, and has formed a fatal precedent for later times. Well, well, quoth the king, for that matter there was no blame in him, for I know that matter better than you, or any one else. Nay, quoth she, besides that, what exploits hath he wrought in several parts and places of this nation to your great slander and disgrace? There is never a nobleman but, if he had done half so much as he hath done, were well worthy to lose his head. Yea, if my lord Norfolk, my lord Suffolk, my father, or any other man had done much less than he hath done, they should have lost their heads ere this. Then I perceive, said the king, you are none of my lord cardinal's friends. Why, sir, she replied, I have no cause, nor any that love you, no more hath your grace, if you did well consider his indirect and unlawful doings. Before the fair Boleyn had fully concluded schooling her royal lover on the financial sins of his favourite minister, the waiters had dined, and came and took up the tables, so no more was heard from that time of their discourse. You may perceive by this, observes our author, how the old malice was not forgotten. The king, for that time, departed from Mrs. Anne Boleyn, and came to the chamber of presence, and called for my lord Wolsey, and in the window had a long discourse with him. Afterwards the king took him by the hand, and led him into the privy chamber, and sat in consultation with him all alone, without any other of the lords, till it was dark night, which blanked all his enemies very sore, who had no other way but by Mrs. Anne Boleyn, in whom was all their trust and affiance for the accomplishment of their enterprises, for without her they feared all their purposes would be frustrated. The king had promised to see Wolsey again in the morning, but the interview was prevented by the adverse influence of the fair intrigante, who had traversed all his hopes by prevailing on the king to attend her in an equestrian excursion. These are the words in which the faithful Cavendish records the fact. This sudden departure of the king was the especial labour of Mistress Anne Boleyn, who rode with him purposely to draw him away, because he should not return till after the departure of the cardinals. The king rode that morning to view a piece of ground to make a park of, which was afterwards, and is at this time, called Harewell Park, where Mistress Boleyn had provided him a place to dine in, fearing his return before my lord cardinal's departure. It is probable that while dallying with her in the gay green wood, at their sylvan meal, that Anne Boleyn extorted from her royal lover the solemn promise never to see or speak with Wolsey again, which is mentioned by the Bishop of Bayonne. The mysterious disappearance of Henry's love letters to Anne Boleyn from the royal cabinet of York House, and the anxiety of the monarch to prevent these records of his private feelings from being carried out of his realm, caused him to offer an unparalleled affront to the departing legate Campeggio, by ordering his luggage to be ransacked at Dover, under pretence that he was conveying Wolsey's treasure out of the kingdom. Nothing was found of suspicious nature, for he had already sent the stolen effusions of Henry's passion to Rome, where they are still shown at the Vatican. The vengeance of Anne Boleyn continued to follow Wolsey after the departure of his colleague, and on the 9th of October 2 bills were filed against him by the Attorney General, charging him with having exercised his legantine authority in England contrary to the law of the land. Wolsey said, he knew that there was a night crow that possessed the royal ear against him, and misrepresented all his actions, an expression that significantly pointed at Anne Boleyn. Wolsey humbly solicited the good offices of Sir Henry Norris to intercede for him to his fair enemy, and anxiously, from time to time, inquired of him if the displeasure of my lady Anne, as he now called her, were somewhat abated, her favour being the only help and remedy. The lingering regard of Henry for his former favourite was openly manifested, when he was told at Christmas that the cardinal was sore sick and like to die, for he expressed great concern, and sent Dr. Butts, his physician, to attend him. When Butts returned, the king said to him, "Have you seen yonder man?" "Yes, sir," was the reply. "How do you like him?" demanded the king. "Sir," said Dr. Butts, "if you will have him dead, I will warrant you that he will be dead within 4 days if he receive not comfort shortly from you." "Marry, God forbid," cried the king, "that he should die, that I would not lose him for 20,000 pounds. I pray you go to him, and do you care to him." "Then must your grace," said Dr. Butts, "send him some comfortable message." "So I will," replied the king, "by you, therefore make speed to him again, and deliver this ring from me for a token." In the which ring was the king's image engraven with a ruby, as like the king as might be desired. "This ring he knoweth well," continued Henry, "for he gave me the same. Tell him that I am not offended with him in my heart for anything, and bid him to be of good comfort." Then spake the king to Mistress Anne Boleyn, saying, "Good sweetheart, as you love me, send the cardinal a token at my request, and in so doing you shall deserve our thanks." She, being disposed not to offend the king, would not disobey his loving request, but incontinently took her tablet of gold that hung at her side, and delivered it to Dr. Butts, with very gentle and loving words. When the compassionate physician returned to his broken-hearted patient at Esher, and delivered the tokens from the king and Anne Boleyn, with the most soothing words he could devise on the king and Mistress Anne's behalf, Wolsey raised himself in his bed, and received the tokens very joyfully, giving him many thanks for the good comfort he had brought him. The king sent 3 more of his physicians to consult with Butts on Wolsey's case, and in 4 days they set him on his feet again. He was, however, too near the court to please the rival power that crossed his star. The Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, sent word to him by Cromwell, that if he departed not instantly for the north, he would tear him with his teeth. When Cromwell reported this message to his patron, Wolsey significantly intimated to him the real quarter from whence the blow proceeded, and predicted further evil to himself from the increasing ascendancy of Anne Boleyn. Her vengeance was not satisfied till she had succeeded in obtaining his arrest for high treason, after he had retired to Cawood, near York, when, as if to bring to his mind the cause that had incurred this deadly hatred, her former lover Percy, then Earl of Northumberland, was the person employed to execute the royal warrant. The happiness of this young noble had been irreparably blighted by his separation from the woman of his heart, and his compulsory marriage with another. He trembled with violent agitation when he arrested Wolsey, whom he treated in a very ignominious manner, causing his legs to be bound to the stirrups of his mule, like a common malefactor. On the 29th of November, just 25 days after his arrest, the unhappy prisoner obtained his release, without the aid of the executioner. The Duke of Norfolk, Anne's maternal uncle, was now the president of the cabinet, and with the Duke of Suffolk and her father, Viscount Rochford, Sir Thomas More, Fitzwilliam, and Stephen Gardiner, formed a junta, by whom the affairs of the realm were conducted. But, according to the reports of the French ambassador, Anne Boleyn was the ruling power, whose influence directed all. She kept her Christmas again at Greenwich, in rival splendour to the queen, and received many costly gifts and gratuities from the enamoured sovereign. Entries connected with Anne Boleyn in Henry's privy purse accounts are curious, and in some measure tend to elucidate the peculiar terms on which they stood. There is on the 22nd of November, 1529, the following item: paid to Cecil, for a yard and a quarter of purple velvet, for Mistress Anne, 12s. 8d. The same day paid to Walter Walsh, for certain stuff prepared for Mistress Anne of divers persons, to the amount of 216 pounds, 9s. 8d. On the last day of December, 110 pounds is paid to her by the king's command. On the 16th of May, 1530, her tailor and skinner, or furrier, are paid from the royal privy purse, for goods and workmanship for my lady Anne. On the 29th, £1 3s. 4d. is paid for bows, arrows, shafts, broadheads, brazier and shooting glove, for my lady Anne. On the 5th of June, a reward of 6s. 8d. was paid to a servant of the Lord Mayor of London for bringing cherries to Lady Anne. On the 8th of the following September, £10 is paid to the wife of the Dove, that is, of the man who keeps a shop with that sign, for linen cloth for her. On the 25th, the singular entry occurs of 10s. paid by the king, for a cow that Urian, Anne's Breton greyhound, had killed. This animal, not the most amiable pet in the world for a maid of honour, was probably brought by Anne from France. The name of Urian, which is one of the appellations of the foul fiend, appears indicative of his evil conditions. His exploit savours of the wolfhound propensities. On the 13th of December, £13 is paid to the wife of the Dove, her linen draper, for linen and other necessaries. Towards the end of the month, the sum of £5 is delivered to Anne, in groats for play money. On the 30th, £100 is delivered to her by the king's command, towards her New Year's gift. The sum of £4, 8s. 8d. is paid to Addington, the skinner, for furring my lady Anne's gowns. It might be about this period that the following incident occurred to Anne Boleyn. A book, assuming to be of a prophetic character, was by some mysterious agency placed in her chamber one day. It seems to have been a similar class with the oracular hieroglyphic almanacs of succeeding centuries, having within its pages certain figures marked with the letter H upon one, A on another, and K on a third, which was expounded as the king and his wives, and to her person certain destruction was predicted if she married the king. Anne, finding the book, took it up, and seeing the contents, she called her principal attendant, a young lady named Anne Saville. "Come hither, Nan," she said. "See, here is a book of prophecies. This is the king, and this is the queen, wringing her hands and mourning, and this is myself, with my head cut off." Anne Saville answered, "If I thought it true, I would not myself have him were he an emperor." "Tut, Nan," replied Anne Boleyn, "I think the book a bauble, and am resolved to have him, that my issue may be royal, whatever may become of me." This story is the more deserving of credence because related in Wyatt's Memorials of Anne Boleyn. It proves either that her mind was free from superstition, or she regarded the production as a device of some of the queen's friends, who might have taken that method of deterring her from her ambitious designs on the crown matrimonial of England. It shows also her determination to be a queen, cote qui quote. In the spring of 1530, her father, the Earl of Wiltshire, was appointed with several eminent divines to attend the congress between the Pope and the Emperor at Boulogne on the part of Henry VIII. The Earl, when introduced into the presence of Clement, gave great offence by refusing to comply with the usual ceremony of kissing his holiness's toe, and, if we may believe Fox, his lordship's dog made matters worse by biting it. The Emperor, when the Earl attempted to offer his arguments in favour of the divorce, bade him be silent and allow his less interested colleagues to speak, adding, "You are a party in the cause." Boleyn, with undaunted spirit, replied, that he came not there as a father, but as the representative of his sovereign; that if the Emperor acquiesced in his royal master's wish he should rejoice, but if not, His displeasure was of no consequence. Nevertheless, the earl and his colleagues offered Charles 300,000 crowns as the price of his consent to the divorce. Among the items for which Anne Boleyn was chargeable to Henry's privy purse in the year 1531 are wearing apparel furnished by George Taylor and John Scott to the amount of £18 6s. 4d, also £40 15s. 8d. to the said Taylor and Addington the Skinner for furs and work done for her, and £18 odd to Lilgrave the embroiderer, on account of his bill for stuff made for my Lady Anne. The sum of £35 is paid to John Scott, on account of his bill for the fair favourite, and other sums to be expended in her service. Then a farm is purchased for her at Greenwich, and paid for by the king. In April, upwards of £40 is dispersed to Rasmus, the armourer, supposed herald painter, for garnishing her desk with gold and other decorations. Notwithstanding all these presents and gratuities, added to the fine income she possessed, Anne was frequently in debt. The privy purse expenses bear record that she pawned one of her jewels, for £20, to her sister Mary, who was really in straitened circumstances. This jewel was redeemed by the king's order on the 21st of November, 1530. Henry constantly had to pay the tailors', furriers', and mercers' bills of his fair unthrifty favourite, to whom his indulgence appears to have been unbounded. Anne, however, had her anxieties at this crisis, for the opinion of all Christendom is so much against the divorce that Henry was disposed to waver. Luther himself declared that he would rather allow the king to take 2 wives than dissolve his present marriage, and the Pope had already caused a secret suggestion of the same kind to be made to Cassilis, but it went no farther, such an arrangement not being very likely to please either of the ladies. At last Cromwell's bold expedient of separating England from the papal see smoothed Anne's path to the queenly chair. Her royal mistress was expelled from Windsor, and she became the king's constant companion. She rode with him on all his progresses, and, with glaring disregard to propriety, occupied apartments contiguous to his own. The dazzling prospect of a crown had rendered Anne forgetful of that delicacy of feeling which should have taught her to regard a stain as a wound. In May 1542, the privy purse expenses of King Henry bear record of the following extravagant item on account of my Lady Anne of Rochford, as she is there called, namely, 22 Flemish ells of gold arras, at 46s. and 8d. a yard, £74 12 and 4d. A few days afterwards we find, item the 22nd day, paid the sergeant of the cellar, for that he won of my Lady Anne at the bowls, and paid, by the king's command, £12 7 and 6d. It is not always that my Lady Anne lost at games of chance, to which she was much addicted. Repeated records occur in the privy purse expenses of her winnings of her royal lover. In May 1531, money is delivered to her to play, and yet the king pays various sums of £4, £15, and odd shillings, for his losses to her. Some cause, perhaps the anxiety connected with her doubtful position in Henry's court, had faded the beauty of Anne Boleyn at this period, for the Venetian ambassador, Carlo Capello, gives anything but a flattering description of her personal charms in a letter to the Senate, as related by Sinuto, December 7, 1532. He says, "My Lady Anne is not the most beautiful in the world. Her form is irregular and flat. Her flesh has a swarthy tinge. She has a long neck, a large mouth, but very fine black eyes." He adds, that it was generally reported that she had borne a son to the king that had died soon after its birth. Such reports, however unfounded they might be, were the natural consequences of her doubtful situation in the court. On the 29th of May, Anne removed from Greenwich to Durham House, and the royal watermen were rewarded by the king with 16s. For conveying her thither by water. In June, a costly cloak and evening dress, familiarly termed a night-gown, were provided for her at the king's especial charge. For the amusement of such of our fair readers as may wish to see a specimen of a milliner's bill of the 16th century for the reigning beauty of the court, we transcribe the account from that valuable work, The Privy Purse Expenses of Henry VIII., for which we are indebted to the indefatigable research of Sir Harris Nicholas. Item, paid to John Malt, for 12 yards of black satin for a cloak for my lady Anne, at 8s. the yard, £4 16s. For making the same cloak, 5s. A yard of black velvet for edging the same, 13s. 4d. 3 yards and 3/4 of black velvet to line the collar and vents (armholes), £1 16s. 2 yards of black satin to line the sleeves of the same cloak, at 8s. the yard, 16s. 11 yards of Bruges satin to line the rest of the cloak, at 2s. 4d. the yard, £1 5s. 8d. 2 yards of buckram to line the upper sleeves of the said cloak, 2s. The whole cost of the cloak is £9 4s. 8d. The nightgown, which was also made of black satin, lined with black taffeta, stiffened with buckram, and trimmed with black velvet, cost £10 15s. 8d. At the same time 16 yards of green damask, at 8s. a yard, were purchased for her. In August, the same year, Lady Russell, the wife of one of the most climbing of Henry's parvenu ministers, endeavoured to propitiate the fair favourite, by the present of a stag and a greyhound. Anne transferred this offering to the king, who rewarded Lady Russell's servant with 40s. Anne was now fast approaching to the lofty mark at which she had been aiming for the last 5 years. On the 1st of September the same year, as a preparatory step for her elevation till a still higher rank, Henry created Anne Boleyn Marchioness of Pembroke, a royal title which had last been borne by his uncle, Jasper Tudor. The king rendered the honour conferred on his betrothed the more marked, because it identified her with his own family. The preamble to Anne Boleyn's patent of creation as Marchioness is couched in language deserving note. The king declares his motives for taking this step are, because a monarch ought to surround his throne with many peers of the worthiest of both sexes, especially those who are of royal blood. For this reason, we, by the consent of the nobility of our kingdom present, do make, create, and ennoble our cousin Anne Rochford, one of the daughters of our well-beloved cousin Thomas, Earl of Wiltshire, and of Ormond, keeper of our privy seal, to be Marchioness of Pembroke, and also by putting on of a mantle, and the setting of a coronet of gold on her head, do really invest unto her the name, title, etc., and to her heirs male. He adds a grant to Anne and her heirs of £35 per annum, out of the crown rents of the county of Pembroke, to be paid by the sheriff. Her father, Gardiner, and the Duke of Norfolk are among the witnesses of this charter, which was made the 1st of September, 1532. Many instances had occurred of great peerages falling to ladies, but this is the first of a female peer being created. Anne was then staying, with almost queenly pomp, at Windsor Castle, and there the ceremony took place which made her a peeress of the realm. The king, attended by the Dukes of Norfolk and Suffolk, the French ambassador, and many peers, besides the privy council, went on Sunday, September 1st, to the state apartment in Windsor Castle, called by some the chamber of salutation, and by others the presence chamber, and seated himself in the chair of state. To this room Anne Boleyn was conducted by a great train of courtiers and the nobility, both lords and ladies. First entered Garter, king at arms, bearing the king's patent of nobility. After Garter came the Lady Mary, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, and cousin german to Anne Boleyn, carrying on her left arm a robe of state, made of crimson velvet, furred with ermine, and in her right hand a coronet of gold. She was followed by Anne Boleyn herself, with her hair loose hanging about her shoulders, attired in her inner garment, called a surcoat, of crimson velvet, lined with ermine also, and with short sleeves. She walked between Elisabeth, Countess of Rutland, and Dorothy, Countess of Sussex, and she was followed by many noble gentlewomen. While she approached the king's royal seat, she thrice made her obeisance, and when she arrived before him, she kneeled. The charter having been presented to the king, he delivered it to his secretary Gardiner, who read it aloud, and, when he came to the words Mantillae inductionem, the king took the robe of state from the Lady Mary and put it on Anne Boleyn's shoulders, and at the words Circuli aurei, the Lady Mary handed him the coronet, which he placed on the brow of the new made marchioness. When the charter was read he presented it to her, together with another that secured to her a pension of £1000 per annum during her life, for maintaining that dignity. She then gave the king humble thanks, and with the coronet on her head, and invested with the robe, she retired, the trumpets sounding most melodiously as she departed from the presence chamber. A largess was cried on her gift to Garter king-at-arms of £8, and to his officers of £11, while Henry gave a largess of £5 on the occasion. The sum of £30 16 shillings 10 was paid from the royal privy purse for the materials, of which Anne Boleyn's robes were made for her investiture as Marchioness of Pembroke. Henry presented her with some miniatures, by Holbein, magnificently set in jewels, as ornaments for her person. The unpublished manuscripts in the Chapter House, Westminster, bear record of a costly donation of gold, silver, and parcel gilt plate, presented by the king to Anne Boleyn on this occasion, to the value of £1188, 11 shillings 10. The articles in this curious inventory consist of cups, flagons, bowls, trenchers, goblets with covers, having the royal arms on shields, spoons, salts, chandeliers, and a chafing dish. She had an establishment which outweighed that of the sister and nieces of the king. She had a train bearer, 3 ladies of the bedchamber, and 4 maids of honour, all of them daughters of barons or knights, 3 gentlemen in waiting, 6 officers, all knights or barons, and more than 30 domestics. In most of the royal architecture which was under progress during the divorce, and while Anne Boleyn was beloved of the king, their initial ciphers were introduced entwined with a true lover's knot. This is still to be seen at Cambridge, where the choir of King's College is separated from the antechamber by a screen added in the year 1534, in which are these ciphers and knot, besides the arms of England impaled with those of Boleyn. Just before the visit Henry made to France in company with Anne Boleyn as Marchioness of Pembroke, Cardinal du Bellay, ambassador from Francis I, thus describes their proceedings. "I am alone every day with the king when we are hunting. He chats familiarly with me, and sometimes Madame Anne joins our party. Each of them are equipped with bow and arrows, which is, as you know, their mode of following the chase. Sometimes he places us both in a station to see him shoot the deer, and whenever he arrives near any house belonging to his courtiers, he alights to tell them of the feats he has performed. Madame Anne has presented me with a complete set of hunting gear, consisting of a cap, a bow and arrows, and a greyhound. I do not tell you this as a boast of the lady's favours, but to show how much King Henry prizes me as the representative of our monarch, for whatever the lady does is directed by him." This dispatch is dated from Hanwell. So is the following, which is written to intimate that King Henry much desired that Anne Boleyn should be invited to his approaching congress with Francis I. "If our sovereign," says Bellay, "wishes to gratify the King of England, he can do nothing better than invite Madame Anne with him to Calais, and entertain her there with great respect." The next sentence is not complimentary to the reputation of Anne Boleyn, for the ambassador adds, "Nevertheless it will be desirable that the King of France brings no company of ladies, indeed there is always better cheer without them, but, in case they must come, he had better bring only the Queen of Navarre to Boulogne. I shall not mention with whom or from whence this idea originates, being pledged to secrecy, but be assured I do not write without authority. As to the Queen of France, not for the world would he, Henry VIII, meet her, for he says, he would as soon see the devil as a lady in a Spanish dress." It was at the period between Anne Boleyn's creation as Marchioness of Pembroke and her recognition as queen, that Wyatt addressed to her the following exquisite lines, in which he bids farewell to her as a lover. "Forget not yet the tried intent of such a truth as I have meant, my great travail so gladly spent, forget not yet. Forget not yet, when first began the weary life, ye know, since when the suit, the service none tell can, forget not yet. Forget not yet the great assays, or trials, the cruel wrong, the scornful ways, the painful patience and delays, forget not yet. Forget not, oh, forget not this, how long ago hath been and is the love that never meant amiss. Forget not yet. Forget not now thine own approved, the which so constant hath thee loved, whose steadfast faith hath never moved. Forget not yet. The state of horticulture in England at this period may be traced by some very interesting items in the privy purse expenses of Henry VIII. in the summer of 1532, in which are recorded rewards paid to sundry poor women on various days, for bringing the king presents of apples, pears, barberries, peaches, artichokes, filberds, and other fruits. His gardeners from Beaulieu, Greenwich, and Hampton bring him grapes, oranges, cucumbers, melons, cherries, strawberries, pomegranates, citrons, plums, lettuces, and, in short, almost every kind of luxury that could be supplied for the royal table in modern times. On the 4th of October was paid, by Henry's orders, £56 for certain silks provided for apparel for Anne, who is styled my Lady Marquess of Pembroke, and the same day £38 10s. 10d. for furring the same. Probably she had her share also in the jewels, mercery, and millinery, for which the royal privy purse accounts are charged, for the amount of more than £12,000 at the same time. The following day, the only daughter of the sovereign receives a noble gift of £10. On the 13th of October, Anne, attended by the Marchioness of Derby and a chosen retinue of ladies, arrived at Dover in the royal train, and early on the following morning they all embarked for Calais, where they arrived at 10 in the forenoon. On the 14th, the Grand Master of France sent a present of grapes and pears to the fair Boleyn. The same day Henry gave further marks of his favour by granting her a settlement of lands in Wales, Essex, Herts, and Somersetshire. On the 21st they progressed with great pomp to Boulogne to meet the French king. Henry and Francis approached each other bareheaded, and embraced. Francis was not accompanied by either his queen, his sister, or indeed by any ladies, a mortifying circumstance to Anne Boleyn, since nothing could afford a more decided proof of the questionable light in which she was regarded at this time by her old friends in the court of France. Hall gives an elaborate account of the munificence of Henry's entertainment at Boulogne, where Francis, in the capacity of host, furnished the cheer and paid all the costs. Though Anne sojourned 4 days with Henry at Boulogne, the absence of the ladies of the French king's family prevented her from appearing at the festivities that were provided for her royal lover. On the 25th she returned with the two kings to Calais, where, for the honour of his realm, our English Harry had caused preparations to be made for the reception of the French sovereign and his court, which can only be paralleled in the gorgeous details of Oriental romance, where, however, silver and gold and pearls are supplied by the writer cost-free, while Henry must have drained his exchequer to furnish the banqueting chamber at Calais, which is thus described by Hall. It was hung with tissue, raised with silver, and framed with cloth of silver, raised with gold. The seams of the same were covered with broad wreaths of goldsmith's work, full of stones and pearls. In this chamber was a cupboard of 7 stages high, all plate of gold, and no gilt plate. Besides that, there hung 10 branches of silver gilt, and 10 branches all white silver, every branch hanging by a long chain of the same sort, bearing 2 lights of wax. The French king was served 3 courses, dressed after the French fashion, and the King of England had like courses, after the English fashion. The first course of every kind was 40 dishes, the second 60, the third 80, which were costly and pleasant. After supper on the Sunday evening, the 28th of October, came in the Marchioness of Pembroke with 7 ladies, in masking apparel of strange fashion, made of cloth of gold, slashed with crimson tinsel satin, puffed with cloth of silver, and knit with laces of gold. These ladies were led into the state chamber just described by 4 damsels dressed in crimson satin, with tabards of pine cypress. Then the lady Marchioness took the French king, the Countess of Derby, the King of Narvaez, and every lady took a lord. In dancing, King Henry removed the ladies' visors, so that their beauties were shown. The French king then discovered that he had danced with an old acquaintance, the lovely English maid of honour of his first queen, for whose departure he had chided the English ambassador 10 years before. He conversed with her some little time apart, and the next morning sent her as a present a jewel valued at 15,000 crowns. On the 30th of this festive month, the two sovereigns mounted their horses, and Henry, having conducted his royal guests to the verge of his dominions, they dismounted on French ground, and there they joined hands with loving behaviour and hearty words, embraced each other, and so parted. The weather was so tempestuous that Anne and her royal lover were detained a fortnight at Calais after the departure of Francis I. On the 14th of November they safely crossed the Channel and landed at Dover. The favourite diversion of Anne Boleyn and the king seems to have been cards and dice. Henry's losses at games of chance were enormous, but Anne, with the single exception of the sum she lost to the sergeant in the cellar at Bowles, appears to be a fortunate gamester. On the 20th of November we observe the following entry in Henry's privy purse expenses delivered to the king's grace at Stone: £9 6s. 8d, which his grace lost at Pope Julius's game, to my lady Marchioness Anne Boleyn, Mr. Bryan, and Maester Weston. On the 25th Henry loses 20 crowns to the same party at the same game, and the following day £18 13s. 4d. On the 28th Anne again wins £11 13s. 4d in a single-handed game of cards with her royal lover. The next day Henry is the loser of £4 at Pope Julius's game, and also on the 31st 16 crowns at the same to Anne and young Weston. Such entries are little to the credit of any of the persons concerned. Pope Julius's game, which was at this time so greatly in vogue at the court of Henry VIII, was probably the origin of the vulgar round game, called in the modern times Pope Joan. The various points at that game, such as matrimony, intrigue, pope, and the stops, appear to have borne significant allusions to the relative situations in the royal drama of the divorce, and the interference of the pope and his agents in preventing the king's marriage with his beautiful favourite, Anne Boleyn. End of section 11.